That is, I try to do fast. That's about fast filling web app. So, all right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for coming to this talk. So, for most of the user, as you know, the web performance is the most important. It makes a lot of sense because if the website is still loading, you will not be able to interact with it, or you will not be able to appreciate the design. So that's obviously the very important part. And in the topic of web performance, or sometimes we can call it web speed, it's about on making the web fast. And usually we stop there, right? But there's another part of web performance that people don't really talk about. Is also making the slow process seem fast. That sounds kind of weird. So we are looking into one good example later. But the first question you might ask, how fast is considering fast nowadays? So it's increasing. It used to be like 8 seconds. Now, 2 seconds. And maybe one day it's going to be 1 second. It's still considering slow. So the expectation of the user is increasing over time. So for the second part of how to make the slow process seem fast, I'll just show you an example from Emirates. So you notice how when you are trying to search for a flight, even though that is really a slow process, you need to talk to a lot of APIs and whatever. And they know that it's going to be long. So instead of just showing a normal spinner, they decided to show you a kind of a dynamic plane flying around and all. It makes you feel a bit, it's not as slow as you thought. Comparing to just something like that for 20 seconds. The one just now, it is really 20 seconds. I time it. So when we are talking here, it's not as slow, but if you are at home and just in the computer, it can feel really slow. So the subject of making slow things feel fast is part of perceived performance. And it is very subjective, but it's important because if it feels fast, which means it's fast to you, doesn't matter how is the API responding and all of the other technique you apply. So if it feels fast, it is really fast. So in the topic of web performance, usually we talk about 4 things. The top is reducing overall load time, making the site load as fast as possible. There's also the interactivity with the user. And the last one is perceived performance. And of course, I only have 10 minutes left, so I cannot talk about all of them today. We are looking into loading spinner, the instant experience, and the lazy load image, which sound quite obvious, but maybe there's something you might miss. So before we get started, my name is Trung. I'm the Google developer expert. I'll just skip this slide to save some time. Welcome to Singapore. We're traveling from the outside of Singapore. I'm not originally from Singapore, but I've been here for like 10 years. And currently I'm with Ascenda. We innovate toward the loyalty program and making reward accessible. So first thing, loading spinner. When I was starting the career about 10 years ago, I do thing that I thought is right. So you notice I just show the spinner every time I fetch an API, which is completely normal. Up to one day, my boss come and ask me, why is it so slow? And I was confused because the API seemed to be really fast, like 200 milliseconds. It's nowhere comparing like to 1 second or something. So the conversation go but before that, we look into the code. You don't have to read all of them. It's just some data, some state, and you set the loading, you set the error. That's it. Simple. It looks okay to me. It's work on my machine. And then the question that he has is why the spinner is always there? There is a way that you can just, not showing the spinner. But cannot. It could be longer for user with slow network connection. It could take us a second or so. So we do all of the assessment, and we found that our API is quite fast. And we decided to show the spinner only if it is longer than 300 milliseconds. So the code, now is the code part. Developer conference, we need to look into code. So simple. You add in a timer. You don't show the spinner immediately. You set it after 300 milliseconds. Which means that when you go into the finish finally block, it could have been finished and you don't show the spinner at all. But if it's really been longer than 300 milliseconds, so you set it to true, and then you have the phone at the end to kind of hide it. So the experience looks something like that. You don't really see that flashing of this icon momentary, and it's really fast. But it takes longer. I hope it's working. So if it's longer than 300 milliseconds, we still show the spinner in case the network connection is slow, for example. So we accomplish like both, like make it feel faster for the user with higher network connection. And for some user, maybe just slow. So we still have the backup. But it kind of a case study for a lot of startup where they was really showing the indicator when that thing is loading, which is a good intention. But sometimes the user might feel that is slow. The user might see other website who doesn't really show it, it's faster. So that is really an important point to take away. And it is not just some small startup like we doing it, right? So in Spotify, you notice how it doesn't show right away. It's only appearing after a while. Because think about if you're interacting with Spotify every single, I don't know, minute or something, then you just see it all the time. It's quite annoying. Yeah. So with that, we move into the second topic, the instant experience, to kind of make it even more fast. So think about the data structure I showed you before. We got this array. And you might think, oh, I might be able to reuse the data into the detail page. So we skip all of that. It's very complicated. But the idea is maybe you're going to introduce a global variable somewhere. And you're going to set the data when you have the list. And then when you are loading the detail page, you're going to just find it from the list, for example, so that you can reuse the data. But of course, in computer science, it's easy to set something, but it's a bit trickier for you to decide when do you invalidate it, or when do you update it, when do you remove it from the cache, for example. So the short answer for all of that is to use a library. And of course, there's two common popular React queries, SWR. There's a few more, but you can probably just look into two of them, quite popular already. So the code we had before is long. Then with React query, it just turned into this kind of hook where you don't really need to set the loading or the error anymore. It just take the query function and you pass in the API code to the server. So the data is going to be transformed by React query for you. And notice the key is quite important. We look into it later. So we also can apply for the fetch the list, the same list and detail. And with that, it works as expected. So it's still sort of spinner. You go back. It's fetching. But the second time you go in, you notice how the data is rendering immediately. It is there in the cache, so you can reuse it. But at the same time, there is one small thing below. It's still trying to make the request in the background for you. So I'm going to explain it in a bit. So that's how it looks like. On the cache, there is the list, and there's the detail. Simple as that. And the really part that I was mentioning is to set the initial data is you use something called initial data, where you just basically try to set the data when you call the hook if it's there. So I just try basically to find the data if I have it from the list. If I have it, then I return it. If not, then I will fetch the API code as usual. Nothing changed. So with this chain, that's how it looks like. It feels a bit faster. The first time you go in, there's no loading spinner. For sure, it's not going to apply for all of the data you have. But for a lot of use cases, just in user, the vehicle, it will have for sure, absolutely. So in React query, there's very important topic of the data is fresh, which means it is going to deliver from the cache for you. No network request will happen. But before, when we see it, it's trying to make an API request because immediately the data is marked as stale. So it's not considered as fresh anymore, which means it's still trying to return it from the cache, but at the same time, the background request will be made so that you get the fresh data in a momentary later. So if we apply all of this, so the way you set the stale is basically just to set this value to be like 2 minutes, which means that within that 2 minutes, it will not try to go to the server to fetch the data again. So we look into the example again, and there's no more additional API code is being made. Only the list of vehicles being made. So I think it's working. It's just instantly, you feel it instantly when you click into something, and it's just load. So I think that's super powerful. And I only have 3 minutes left, so I go through the last one very quickly: lazy load image and iframe. So we all know images is becoming very expensive over the year. With the top 10% of the website deliver like 4 megabytes of image. If you have 100 gig of data a month, that's not a problem. But you have just 1 gig, it's gonna go out really quickly. So lazy load is basically we are only load the image when you need it, which means when the image is not in the visible screen, you will not load the image. Simple as that. And there's a lot of technique that you can do it existing with JavaScript. So the first one, you don't using sources, you put in data source, but then you put in the class. So the library will try to look for this class and we try to load the image. The second tool is about using some placeholder. But the interesting thing is like you can do image lazy loading using the browser built-in capability, using loading equal to lazy. Anyone know about this? Raise your hand. Okay, I assume you don't know, so you don't raise your hand. But it's been introduced for quite long. So it's been introduced in 2019 in Chrome and even like Safari in 2022, which means 2.5 years has passed. You can freely to use it in your project. And if it doesn't support, it still load the image as expected. So I am gonna give you a very heavy demo using 400 images of a cat. So notice how it just keeps running. Just keep running. Somehow it's not transfer. Sorry. I think there's a glitch on the video somehow. But with lazy load image, only 5. That's it. As you're scrolling, then the image is going to be loaded gradually instead of loading all at once, eagerly. So we compare it. It's like 20 megabyte and 100 something kilobyte initially. That is a huge save. But then obviously, you are not going to load 100 images all at once. So that's what we do at Ascenda. We have this UI. I'm going to try to speed run now, where there's like 10, and the whole thing is 24. So like 240. I'm going to speed it, and then I'll just skip that part. I don't have enough time. But basically, it's saved from 100 megabyte to 18. And with a lot more optimization, it's down to 1 megabyte. So that is like 100 times saved. You can really put it into your CV. With that, I think I don't have enough time for anything, so I just speed on all of that. But iframe, you can do the same thing. Image and iframe, you can do the same thing. Loading lazy. And sorry. Yes, that's the summary. Minimize the use of spinner. Do use initial data and browser level lazy load image. Can you show the last one for a second? There's a QR code, but somehow it doesn't render correctly. This is for the slide. Thanks so much. I don't know what happened.